Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As always, it is lovely to have you. We are joined this evening by H. Melt, a poet, artist, and educator whose work celebrates trans people, history, and culture. So they are going to read us some beautiful poems from their book, There Are Trans People Here, which is a testament to the healing power of community and the beauty of trans people. So, hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me virtually at Busboys and Poets. I wish I could be there eating a meal and then breathing afterwards, but
I know, hopefully soon, but I'm so glad that you could at least join us on screen. So I'm going to let you go ahead and start your reading and enjoy.
I want to let people know that they can drop lines that you like or questions or anything in the chat. Feel free to use that. So this is my book, There Are Trans People Here. It came out in November with Haymarket Books, and for Poetry Month, I'm doing a couple more readings around the country, and I'm actually going to start with the afterword of the book, which I haven't read before out loud at any reading, to give you some sort of context for why I wrote the book and the ideas behind it and the impact that writing it has had on me. Writing this book challenged me to center trans joy. I'm a lot more familiar with writing about grief. Most of the trans literature I've read focuses on the pain, discrimination, and violence trans people experience, which is understandable because our realities can be bleak. I've written about many of those moments in my own life. It was what I needed at the time. Now, I need trans joy. I need to know trans joy exists in order to imagine myself living in the future. I remember the first time I picked up Nan Goldin's photography book, The Other Side. It documents many of her trans and gender nonconforming friends at a drag bar in 1970s Boston. I found the book sitting on the shelf at a trans friend's apartment in Los Angeles. When I spotted the book and pulled it down, I opened a portal to the trans past. I was moved by the introduction, which states, "The pictures in this book are not of people suffering gender dysphoria, but rather expressing gender euphoria." I didn't know gender euphoria was possible. I knew that trans joy existed, but it was difficult to find. In those photographs, I recognized the deep joy of trans friendship through a historical lens. While The Other Side gave me a glimpse at trans history, another book of photographs gifted me a vision of my future. The collection To Survive on This Shore by Jess T. Duggan and Vanessa Faber features portraits and interviews with trans elders from across the United States. On the cover is Mama Gloria posing in the middle of a snowy Chicago street in a full-length fur coat. Inside the book, I found more trans elders who I recognize, know, and love. Flipping through its pages, I was able to imagine my future as a trans person for the first time. Reading To Survive on This Shore inspired me to write towards trans futures. It inspired me to organize an event with local trans elders who are featured in the book. At that event, I began to understand that I shouldn't only mourn the queer and trans elders lost to us. It is equally important for me to honor my elders who are still here. My future was no longer unimaginable. This opened up so many possibilities in my poetry because my focus expanded beyond surviving my day-to-day life. Finally, I could dream. Transness is inherently futuristic. It requires us to imagine ourselves anew. At the same time, gender nonconformity has a long history that is often hidden, erased, and ignored by white supremacy, colonialism, and Christianity in the US. While it may seem contradictory, writing about trans futures encouraged me to conduct historical and familial research. This is evident in poems like On My Way to Liberation and The Rides Must Continue, where I merge my familial and trans ancestries. I'm tracing my own lineage, one that embraces trans beauty, brilliance, and resistance. There Are Trans People Here is also deeply connected to my experiences in queer and trans communities in Chicago. There are people working every day to make the world more welcoming to trans people. Many people I know are organizing to abolish the carceral state, stop deportations, defund the police, and decriminalize sex work. We are reimagining our communities one garden, march, protest, lesson plan, name change, and poster at a time. Trans people deserve to live long and fulfilling lives. We deserve a world free of prisons, police, and deportations, a world where we have universal health care and stable housing, and schools that affirm trans youth. Abolition and liberation are not abstract concepts. I know all of these things are possible because they are already happening. My radical imagination was crucial in writing this book. Miriam Kaba writes in We Do This Till We Free Us, liberation under oppression is unthinkable by design. Our charge is to make imagining liberation under oppression completely thinkable. I hope that my work makes trans liberation more thinkable and more of a concrete reality. In City of Trans Liberation, I dreamt of public art dedicated to trans elders. Other people must have imagined this too. A few years after writing that poem, She Built NYC announced plans to install permanent statues of Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson in New York. When I learned about this, it was a reminder that dreaming and action are both required to transform the world. The artists, activists, and organizers around me encourage me to tap into my radical imagination and create art relevant to social movements. They have paved the way for my own path to liberation. Art, writing, and creativity have always guided me into the future. There Are Trans People Here is my attempt to write the future I want into existence. So I'm gonna start with a poem that has strangely been getting a lot of attention online. Um, it's funny because when you're writing poems, you have poems that you think aren't very good or aren't their best or maybe aren't the most clear. And then once they're published, people sometimes latch on to those poems. So I was kind of surprised people have had really strong reactions to this poem, which has really changed my relationship to it. This poem is called I Don't Want a Trans President. I don't want a trans president. I want trans doctors performing my surgery, trans journalists reporting the news, trans historians writing textbooks. I don't want trans capitalists walking on Wall Street, or trans cops patrolling my neighborhood. I want trans musicians playing on my stereo, trans designers crafting my clothes, trans chefs filling my stomach, trans farmers planting my food, and trans gardeners picking flowers for my funeral. So we just had Trans Day of Visibility a couple of days ago, which is an interesting day. Um, I don't know if people know the band Gloss, but they have a song called Trans Day of Revenge. And I wrote a poem inspired by that song. And my poem is also called Trans Day of Revenge. On Trans Day of Revenge, cis people will come out as cis, use the wrong restroom, be called by the wrong name, lose a job for being cis, be the only cis in the family, fail to pass as cis, never feel cis enough. On Trans Day of Revenge, all books about cis people will disappear. Cis characters will be played by trans actors. The news will only talk about trans people. The train will be crowded with trans workers on Trans Day of Revenge. Playgrounds will be full of trans children, laughing, learning, and loving. Isn't that the best revenge? The riots must continue. For my 29th birthday, I went to Philadelphia, where my grandparents met at Temple University, and my great aunt was a docent at the art museum, and my great grandmother lived by Rittenhouse Square, which I visit in the rain, walking under my purple umbrella, pausing at the fountain, reading off my phone. Billy's first Pride Parade began right here. I walk a block to Dewey's Diner to visit my ancestors who were denied service and arrested here in 1965. My Nana lived so close, she could have heard the protests or waved to me from her window as River snapped a picture of me in front of the bronze plaque where Dewey's previously sat. Now it is a construction site. Most of my relatives are gone. But the marches and the sit-ins and the riots must continue. Trans people against bans, walls, and borders. When news of the Muslim ban broke, protesters fled to airports to free people being detained and deported. Chelsea called, and I took the red line to the blue line to O'Hare to international arrivals. Lawyers hunched over laptops and scribbled on yellow legal pads in the dining area of a McDonald's. I saw cardboard signs made out of IKEA boxes and held one reading Trans People Against Bans, Walls, Borders. We surrounded police. We sat down on the streets. We removed the American flag and put it back upside down. I want to travel to a world where no one needs papers or government approval to visit friends and family, attend school and work, to return or build a new home. Translit. This is after Jamila Woods. It has a footnote at the bottom, which I'll read first and then get into the poem. The footnote reads, in 2015, Chelsea Manning was facing solitary confinement partially due to a prohibited property charge related to books and magazines that were confiscated from her cell, including Casey Plett's book, A Safe Girl to Love. Translit is bullshit unless it is written by trans people, unless it is written for trans people. I want Translit that breaks linear narrative. I want Translit to bash back against the police. I want Translit to take up an entire bookshelf in the library. I want Translit in every classroom, in every backpack, in every pair of hands on a long commute. I want Translit not to be a federal crime. I want Translit in prisons to set my brothers, sisters, and siblings free. City of Trans Liberation, after Martín Espada. City of Trans Liberation, where statues of Lou and Sylvia dance in the streets, where no kids are kicked out or run away from home, where no body asks for ID or our real names, where everybody has a body they believe in, where we can go outside in the daytime without being harassed, where we are taught to love instead of kill ourselves, where Trans Day of Remembrance celebrates those who died of natural causes, where there are no borders between who we were and who we are becoming. On Trans Street. On Trans Street, everyone knows your chosen name. On Trans Street, there are bungalows, courtyard buildings, and rent control. On Trans Street, there are bike lanes, abundant wheelchair ramps, and prompt snow removal. On Trans Street, there is free STI and HIV testing. Doctors prescribe hormones and perform abortions without a fight. On Trans Street, there is a school where trans history is taught by trans teachers. On Trans Street, there is a mural of Miss Major. At Stonewall, on Trans Street, Juliana Huxtable is the resident DJ. On Trans Street, no TERFs are allowed. On Trans Street, no catcalling is allowed. On Trans Street, there are no prisons, no checkpoints, no police stations, no military bases, no detention centers. On Trans Street, the cemetery is always full of visitors. On Trans Street, we are never alone. Thank you.
Hi again. Thank you so much for sharing those with us.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about how in the past couple of months and even in the past couple of weeks, there have been so many bills and so many efforts to do a number of like really basic, simple things that I'm asking for in the book. So like, right, we see in Florida this like quote unquote banning of, right, saying the word gay or queer or trans, right, like not allowing teachers to essentially educate their students, and especially their queer and trans students, on gender and sexuality and race. We see some of the most banned books being books especially written by queer and trans people of color. About a week ago, some queer authors noticed that their books had disappeared from Target's website for sale and started compiling a spreadsheet. And I noticed that my book, this book, despite other Haymarket poetry books that were released at the exact same time as me, still being on the website, my book is still not there. And my publisher has been asking why that is, and obviously not getting any real answers, because we know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't, right? Like, they can't say it blatantly, even though it is so blatant. So yeah, I just have been thinking about, to me, so many of the things in the book, right? Like access to trans history, access to trans education, being able to walk down the street without being harassed, right? Like being able to have access to healthcare, right? Like literally watching all of these states all across the country basically use trans children as a way to like organize and galvanize their like extreme right-wing basis, is like so obviously disheartening and so hard and difficult, considering that over the years, especially the kids who are in school now, who are in elementary and middle and high school, have so much more access to queer and trans knowledge than I did, where like there was no Don't Say Gay bill, but like there was, right, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and there was no quote unquote marriage equality, and there was no there were no out queer or trans people, much less any discussion or like publicly available knowledge from actual queer and trans people, especially that was available to young folks and like to people under the age of 18. So I think as I reflect on my life, and particularly some of the spaces and people and like things that I'm writing about in this book, and think about being out as a trans person for over a decade now, in some ways, like the public attacks are so much more blatant. Like they were there before, but they were so much more coded and you know, like they were often in the forms of like jokes or tropes in movies. Um, yeah, or just trans death. Like it was really hard to know anything about trans life, and there wasn't really anything on the internet at that point that
Yeah.
you know, like had information from trans people and for trans people about that was like affirming of our lives. So I think yeah, like so many of these things that are really basic, right? Like having access to literature, like having healthcare, like having um, a home and a family and a
Very fair things.
like
Like,
those things are unfortunately still like denied to trans people, and right now are being very intentionally in the US and in the UK like being explicitly taken away. But I think for me, another huge part of this book is just the ways that trans communities care for themselves, and how even despite living in, right, like a time like this where essentially you know, everyone from like the government to people on the street are trying to erase your basic existence, trans people are still caring for each other, and they always have been. And I think that yeah, that is what keeps me here, and that is what has like, yeah, just kept me alive and kept me like um just able to like even like write poems. Like I wouldn't be able to write poems if I didn't have both communities that were caring of trans people and trans communities themselves. And I think that for me, the way that I really found that in like a major way was through poetry, and was through, you know, like youth poetry communities in Chicago. And for that, I am grateful. But yeah, it didn't come from, right? Like it didn't come from the government. It didn't come from
definitely
doctors.
not the government.
Like it didn't come from teachers. It did, you know, like it came from being around people who like, our job was to be vulnerable with each other, and our job was to just like share our true life stories with each other. And I think that that is like what built the sort of conditions for me to start just like being who I am, because that is like of such high value in especially like spoken word youth poetry communities. So I'm grateful for poetry, even if, you know, folks trying to take our books out of the library and out of stores and all this nonsense. I'm grateful for poetry, for just allowing me that space and allowing me to build and like find a really loving, supportive community.
Yeah, and that is really important. And you're right. Like, I was even just thinking as you were speaking, you know, they have all of the kind of passive aggressive, very, very transphobic jokes and things like that, and queerphobic as a whole, jokes that you'll see in movies and those kinds of things. And then you'll have examples of people in pain and people who are suffering, and you don't see a lot of trans joy. And I think it is so important to bring it to the forefront, which is why, like, it's an incredible thing that you've done with your work. And I understand, you know, I can see where that importance comes from. um, your book comes with a study guide,
Yeah.
Was that part of your catalyst for deciding to create a study guide, helping other people learn?
Yeah, so my friend Eve Ewing, who also has released a few poetry collections with Haymarket, had this really great study guide that I saw that went along with her book 1919 about
Mhm.
the race riots that happened in Chicago in that year, and beyond. And the study guide was unlike any other study guide I have seen for a book.
Mm.
Um, it had creative projects, it had a timeline, it had biographies, it had creative exercises, poetry exercises, art exercises, while also having, like, state and national standards for teachers, especially who are in middle schools or high schools. So um, I know and believe that a major function of my work is to support and affirm, especially trans young people. And it was important to me knowing that there are so many teachers out there who might not have the tools, or
Mm.
have the access to community or be in the know of, where the material lives. Like, there, you know, I feel like this can't be true, but there was no trans curriculum, like, period, at the high school or middle school or earlier level that I could find. And so I partnered with this amazing educator based in LA, Rabia Kasim Clay, and she helped me write an amazing guide that really centered helping students connect with their lineages, connect with their ancestors, talk about trans people, and create their own projects and art
Mhm.
in response to a lot of the major themes in the book.
Yeah, that's fantastic because for a lot of, like you said, without having a curriculum, for a lot of young people, especially, like, it's difficult to name what you don't know. And if they don't have, teachers might be well intentioned and not have the language, or young people might just not have language to explain who they are. So I think that's really fantastic. And there's so many great questions in there, like right at the beginning, like, what is liberation? How does care work and flourish in communities? Who are our ancestors? And I've never seen questions like that in a study guide before. And they're really, really beautiful and thought provoking. Do you have any, like, a quick summary of your own answers to those questions?
Oh my God. I mean, I think that,
Putting you on the spot a little bit.
yeah, so I think that the whole book is, I mean, we wrote the study guide afterward, and we
Mm,
wrote the study guide through our own studying of what the poems were doing and the
mm,
content that the poems were engaging. Um, so yeah, like, those big questions are really just at the heart of this book, and I think of
yeah,
my work more generally. I really didn't want, like, a study guide that was going to be like, what does gender mean? Like, what is your
yeah,
gender?
yeah,
Like, a sort of 101. Like, I really didn't want a 101, like, intro to gender and sexuality for young people, because that is one, those sorts of things exist elsewhere, and,
yeah.
like, two, that's boring. And, like, three, I think that the work that I'm doing is way beyond that. Like, I'm
Mm,
not writing towards a cis understanding of what it means to be trans. I'm writing about moments in my life and people in my life who have contributed to, like, moments of liberation and resistance and, like, freedom and joy and pleasure in my life. And I think that, like, care was really the big theme that, I didn't really see until after I wrote the book.
mm,
There's the epigraph of the whole book, which is from a book called Trans Care by Hill Malatino. The whole epigraph for the entire collection is "Care is deeply political." And that book, Trans Care, really influenced me in, along with care work and along with We Do This Till We Free Us, in just thinking about like, what are the moments in my life and the moments that I've been a part of, that I've seen like people feel a sense of that freedom without making it seem like there isn't still like a daily barrage of violence. So there's a poem in the book, called At the Chicago Marathon, and it's about my friend Logan and about him running the Chicago Marathon after getting trans-affirming surgery, and me handing him the trans flag as he ran, this huge race that has so many spectators and has people from all around the world coming to watch and also running and participating in the marathon. And so like that is such a small moment, like literally was probably a 1 to 2 second moment of me handing him this flag as he ran past me, that like really embodied to me like trans care. Like that to me is like a concrete example of trans care. There's also a poem in the book called Trans Care that lists a bunch of people, in my life who cared for me, and each line kind of mentions a different person, and mentions like the meals that they made for me and like, like my mom making mac and cheese during like recovery, and my friend going to the pharmacy to pick up my pills.
That was actually one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
For sure. I love that one.
And like, I guess I didn't realize how foundational like that poem was to like the arc of the book. And I wanted like, I very intentionally, that is like the third or fourth poem in the book, and I very intentionally wanted those poems about trans community and trans care and like trans chosen family to be at the front of the book and not at the back.
Yeah.
As if like there was some sort of linear narrative, or like coming out narrative happening in the book. I wanted people to see right from the very beginning, like moments of liberation, in the past, in the present, and in the future. Like there's a poem right at the very beginning of the book about, that sort of relates my grandfather surviving the Holocaust and some of the things that he did in order to survive, to some of the things that I've done in my life. And so I think, this like denial of trans history and like trans life, and it just is like, it just literally is so violent, and that wasn't the first thing that I wanted trans people to feel entering this book.
Yeah, I think back to what you said about the not wanting, the kind of gender 101 and the kind of boring beginning spheres, and instead writing a book for trans people. But that's exactly the point about how important it is to have things made by trans people for trans people, because very often when they're not, it's not, it doesn't have the heart behind it. You know what I mean? So I definitely, there's so much heart in this book. The simple thought that you had, not to start it off with pain, but to start from the very beginning and from the outset with a view of the future, and with these beautiful, beautiful pieces of information about the experience that you had with your found family. And even that piece that you wrote comparing a kind of, not comparing, but drawing parallels between your experience with your grandfathers. That's not something that I think anyone could imagine if they did not live that experience. It's very personal and it's very honest, and it's really, really beautiful. And even from the beginning, that poem that you open up with, it talks about a lot of the frustration and the pain, rightfully so, of what's going on. But it still ends with that beautiful, like, little bit, when every day we awaken to build them anew. And I even just found that ending with that was still ending with a beautiful thing, ending with a hopeful thing. Like, you're still waking up, you're still building. And that is definitely to be commended in a really, really tough time. To go to another thing about happiness and joy, a beautiful piece was In All the Missing Sweetness. I loved the ending where you drew the kind of metaphorically put honey in your teacup to bring the sweetness back for all the sweetness that you lost over the years. Do you have any real life examples of this kind of self-care you'd be comfortable sharing, or some advice for other people who need to add a little bit of honey into their own cups? Because I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, and also that, like, is literal. Like, I literally wake up in the morning and make tea and put honey in it. It is very literal, but also
I love that.
metaphorical too. Yeah, so I think that one of the things that I learned in writing this book and thinking about care, like we've been talking about, and care work, is that, so to me, like, the best care is communal care. And there's so many ways that my community takes care of me and in which I try and take care of them. There's a couple of mentions of flowers in the book, which I don't think I read any of those poems that mention flowers, but just yesterday, um, a friend of mine who's also a poet had a book come out this week, and it's their debut book. I'm actually reading with them tomorrow at Skylight Books in LA. And yesterday they came into the bookstore where I work to sign copies of their new book. And I, being the person that I am, and also loving flowers, and also considering the cover of their book literally is a body with, like, all these beautiful floral illustrations. I when I made them a bouquet with a bunch of flowers, sunflowers, tulips, eucalyptus, and calla lilies. And it is the biggest bouquet I've ever seen in my life. They were like, I feel like I won a pageant. It was extremely heavy. It was like probably 10 pounds.
Wow.
But that, like, that to me is like a small act of care. And I too have received flowers from other people that have made me feel great. One of my friends has a garden in their backyard, and I went to their garden, must have been last fall, and or maybe at the end of summer, and they have this overflowing backyard full of flowers, and full of zinnias especially. And getting a hand cut floral bouquet from your friend who grew those flowers in their yard, in the ground, from seeds, is just like the most joyous thing.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, that to me, like, that is like a deep, deep metaphor for community and all the ways that we create and produce and share beauty in this world, and all that we grow, both like personally on an individual level and also communally, the ways that we grow together and nurture each other. I Yeah, I love flowers, and that's one small way.
I'm also a really big fan of flowers. I tend to actually even just buy them for myself and put them in the house whenever I
Yeah,
need a bit of care.
yeah. Last summer I had a flower share, which I think every
What's
other
that?
like like a farm share where you get like a basket of veggies that is grown by a local farm and they deliver it to you on a regular basis. But I got a flower share from this.
Sounds
Apparently,
amazing.
I think it's a lesbian flower farm in Wisconsin, and um, for last summer, I got like for the whole summer long, I think every other week I got a different bouquet that was grown by them, and all like flowers and plants that are natural to the Midwest. And yeah, that was just like it was wonderful to just always have a bouquet coming every now and then
Yeah,
and
that
not
sounds
knowing.
amazing.
Yeah, like, not knowing what it was gonna look like or, you know, but that was really fun and, yeah, just brought, like, a little bit of just, like, brightness
Yeah.
and, softness and fragrance and beauty to my everyday life last summer.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'm definitely going to look into something like that. Um, so we're coming to the end of our time, and I just want to finish actually by bringing it back to found families. Um, like you were mentioning before, there are lots of names kind of scattered throughout the book, and their stories about kind of how their own experiences and your experiences. And you've spoken about the value of found families. But I'm also curious about what the process of finding a found family is like when you start to, and not the difficult part, the, oh my gosh, I need to find people. The good part, when you start to recognize these people, this is my found family. What does that feel like, and what's that experience like?
Yeah, it's scary in a way, not in like a negative way, but
Yeah.
in a like transformative way.
Mhm.
Um, I think that so much, I mean, some of my longest friends are poets
Mm.
that I met here in Chicago in the scene, and like I guess I'm trying to say that my poetry family is also part of my found family,
Yeah.
and getting to go to like my friends' mom's annual New Year's Day party and like going to, like friends' annual barbecues and stuff like that, where there is a lot of family around and there is like also a lot of friends and a lot of people who have known each other for a long time. I think that also is a big part of Chicago art is just like the close knit nature
Mhm.
of artists and writers in the city, and are kind of like peer mentoring and growing up together. I think that like I mean it just is a relief, honestly, um,
Yeah, I can imagine.
to be able to like trust in people um who are not part of your right like family of origin, to depend on them, to help them, to be there in the hospital for them, um like to also watch them succeed and watch them like win awards and run races and cook meals and do all the things, DJ, etc. um yeah, I think for me, the difficult part around chosen family has been like understanding that even chosen family is like a malleable concept, and that there are people who come in and out or come in and out of closeness in my life, in my chosen family, and that's okay. And that is just like the nature of family and the nature of relationship. And like there are going to be fights and going and disagreements, and like we're going to do things that we don't like, like we're going to make mistakes together. And I guess for me, some of the people who I feel closest to in my chosen family are people who have allowed me to make mistakes and still seen my humanity and allowed me to learn and grow from those things, rather than just like, treating each other as if we're disposable. So that's something that I'm really grateful for, and I think that to me is like a defining element of just like my healthiest relationships in my life in general. Is just with people who are close enough to see like all of my humanity and not like idolize me and like put me on a pedestal, but people who are like interested in just supporting me, and me doing the same for them as well, to just like continue growing, continue our own like collective and personal healing processes. And that, like, to me, chosen family is just very healing. And I hope that this book is healing, especially for other queer and trans people to read.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that what you said about people, your chosen family seeing all of your humanity, that's really the heart of it, isn't it? About, chosen family. It's like they stick around and help you grow from the mistakes. So yeah, thank you so much for this. I had a fantastic time talking to you. I had a fantastic time reading your book.
Thank you.
I highly recommend it to everyone out there. You can order your copy through Eventbrite tonight. And if you'd like to order it later on, you can go through bookshop/shop/Busboys Books. So yeah, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you in person soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. You enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. We love having you. It's always great. Please check out our Eventbrite to see what we've got up next week. We've got 2 more virtual events on the books. So yeah, excited to see you there. Bye-bye.